Vanilla World of Warcraft was home to more deleted content than you could possibly imagine, from raids, to dungeons, to locations, to zones, to quest lines, to legendaries. There are more things that are hidden in the depths of Vanilla's mystery than most people will ever realize. In this video, we're going to deep dive raids and the potential raids that were removed from the Vanilla world and what they actually look like, because there were quite a few of them. And we're going to start with the biggest one, the most complete one, and the one that did eventually become a raid in TBC. But we have Old Karazhan. Now, Old Karazhan was 3 parts: Lower Tower, Upper Tower, and Karazhan Crypts. Now, Season of Discovery, we got Karazhan Crypts. It's cool, it's interesting, but it doesn't really hold a candle to Giga Karazhan. That's right, the Karazhan in TBC is actually drastically smaller than Old Karazhan. Old Karazhan as a tower is wild in size. 2 whole raid locations. One I think was meant to be like a 20-man raid similar to ZG and AQ20, and one was meant to be a full-on 40-man raid, but it was scrapped. And the reason for it being scrapped is quite simple: time. They ran out of time. John Stott wanted to create another Blackrock Mountain-sized giga location for the vanilla world, and they had to make decisions, and those decisions led to Karazhan as a whole being cut and then repurposed, completely shortened and made smaller, and then turned the TBC 10-man raid we got. But imagine Old Karazhan brought to life. Imagine 2 whole sections. You have your Molten Core, and then you have your Blackwing Lair equivalent. This is insane, but we're never going to see it unless Classic Plus magically becomes a thing and the devs choose to finish it off. But the size of it is extreme. You know what's not extreme though? My sub count. So hit that sub button. But moving on, we have Batol. Now, Batol is another location that, much like Karazhan, was hit with the hammer of time. Now, a lot of Vanilla's deleted content came down to them having to launch the game and make money. Quite literally, that's all it came down to. If they had another year, we likely would have had 6 or 8 phases in original Vanilla instead of just the 4 that we mainly got. And by the 4, I mean Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, AQ, and Nax. Because they had to scrap things like hero classes, they had to scrap things like Death Knights, they had to scrap things like zones. And I'll cover zones later in the video as well. But Batol as a whole was meant to be a Blackrock Mountain-esque gigastructure. Ginormous, full of quests, dungeons, exploration, but it was scrapped rather early on, because after seeing how much time it took to make Blackrock Mountain, everybody agreed, John Stott, Blackrock Mountain was amazing, but this took almost a full year to create, and we can't put that much time on every single mega location. We have to ship World of Warcraft. So Batol, despite being originally planned to be as big as Blackrock Mountain and have all this content, never really came to fruition. Now, it's not just a raid. It was essentially for the most part meant to be a zone as well. Dungeons, quest lines, connecting to Ironforge and Blackrock Mountain via the Dark Iron Highway, but I'll cover that next. I want to talk about Batol a bit more. Now, would this have been a singular raid? Would it have been a 20-man raid, a 40-man raid? It's debatable, because for the most part, a lot of those old notes are lost, and we are working off of memory and old interviews and what people have said. There really isn't much evidence of what was meant to be the complete picture aside from Blackrock Mountain-esque mega location, come back and finish, and they never came back to finish. Which takes me to the Dark Iron Highway. That's right, the Dark Iron Highway is a mystical, mysterious location that has been part of the rumor mills for years and years and years, and people have been wanting to know what's behind that gate. And to this day, we don't know. It's been just about 20 years, just over 20 years, and nobody really knows what's behind the Dark Iron Highway. Chris Metzen, who actually has all the old notes, won't open his notes to let us know. And to be fair, I would not be surprised if the man forgot what he was initially going to put back there. But based off the leaks and the little bit of information we've managed to piece together, it was meant to be a giant military wing or a giant sealed off location of unknown horrors. Now think, for example, the Forgotten Ones, the Void, things of that nature, hidden deep below Blackrock Mountain. And in both cases, it was either meant to be another UBRS-esque location, but considering that the location was inside the dungeon, it's more likely that it was meant to be a raid, but I do have to put that caveat out that it could have been another 10-man dungeon. But everything points toward it being a raid, either based off the Void, for example, Cthulhu, etc., or another Dark Iron raid. And we never had a Dark Iron raid. We had the dungeon, but it was meant to be a deeper, bigger Dark Iron civilization and city that we were meant to raid and destroy, because that's what heroes do. We pillage and we destroy in the name of good, depending on who you ask. Now, this next one is called the Dragon Isles, and we eventually got the Dragon Isles in retail. That's right, we got this big, expansive location. Now, I'm not going to call it amazing because I chose to skip it, and I don't want to speak to its quality, aside from the fact that the little bit I played was fun. But it wasn't the Dragon Isles they imagined back in vanilla, which was in the northwest of Azeroth, or the Eastern Kingdoms. And it was meant to connect essentially just north of Stratholme. There was meant to be a path, some roads, some islands that you were meant to island hop to, or maybe even swim across, I'm not exactly certain. The old map was essentially scrapped, but it's there. We never finished it. It was this ginormous squid, this Nautilus, and it was huge, but they never really got past putting in the bones of the location. Now, we know there was meant to be a raid here. Old map showed that this was meant to be a max level raid, level 70, which is another thing that was deleted from the game. Vanilla was meant to be level 70, but they had to drop it to 60 because of reasons. I'm not sure on the exact reasons, but I think it's because they wanted to save level 70 for another expansion, and that was the main reason, but do not quote me on that because I do not think that is actually correct. But the Dragon Isles was not only a zone, but a raid. And based off the writing, it looks like Alexstrasza was the main raid boss. Now again, keep in mind that the Alexstrasza we know and the Alexstrasza of Vanilla WoW are different. The lore and the stories and everything we have now wasn't as encompassing and well written and expansive as it is the modern day. Alexstrasza had just been freed from the control of the Old Horde, or the Dark Horde if you want to call it that, and she was traumatized by the trauma they inflicted on her is the best way to put it. I'm not going to really explain all the trauma because it's a very, very long list of war crimes that they committed, but Alexstrasza probably hated humans, hated the Alliance, hated the Horde, and viewed all mortals as being evil and to be exterminated, and then we had to go there and stop her, knock some sense into her. I don't think they were going to make us kill Alexstrasza, but again, we're just guessing here on what the Dragon Isles raid was meant to be and why it was called Alexstrasza Instance. Now, I do want to give another caveat here, and that caveat is the fact that all the raids and dungeons were all open world. When World of Warcraft was initially being designed, there was no instance raiding or dungeons. Every single thing was open world. They eventually decided that this was not exactly great or fun, and they completely reworked into the instance content we have today. For example, the Wailing Caverns, the dungeon was initially just the entrance. There was no portal into the Wailing Caverns. You went into the skull mouth, you go down all the way to the back, and that little big circle area at the end, that was it. That was the dungeon. And then they decided, let's keep expanding, and then they made the instance content, and they kept expanding and expanding and expanding. But they changed how World of Warcraft was in pre-alpha to beta to launch, a 4 different game. But now we're gonna move on to a place that had a lot of work put into it, then was scrapped, and then completely reutilized in TBC, and that is the Caverns of Time. That's right, the Caverns of Time was meant to come out in vanilla, and it was meant to have a raid, but the very first thing they worked on was, that's right, Black Morass. Now, the Black Morass zone is finished. It's actually bigger than TBC's Black Morass. They actually made it a bit smaller because the original Black Morass was just Black Morass, but more. It wasn't actually like bigger in the sense of more stuff, just more swamp. And they made that smaller, made it better, made it a dungeon. Now, I'm kind of working off of what ifs and hearsay here, but it looked like Black Morass was meant to be a raid. It was designed as being this very long, drawn-out raid where more and more enemies were summoned and you defeat them, and then the next boss is summoned, you defeat them, and it's just wave after wave. A raid where you never move. Imagine you go into Onyxia, and you have to defeat Onyxia boss 1, then 2, then 3, and each time you defeat a boss, more waves of whelps, or draconids, or anything else comes, and then you defeat them, then the next boss spawns, and then verse and verse, like a gauntlet essentially. A trial of the Grand Crusader. But again, we do know there was meant to be a raid in the Caverns of Time, but I do not want to say that it was Black Morass or not, but they did design multiple locations. If you see all the portals down there, if you can glitch in, because you are allowed to glitch in, it is fully finished building. They put a rock there to stop people from getting in, but people managed to get in quite easily. And once you get in, you can see all the instance locations that they were planning on doing. But again, this got scrapped and saved for the Burning Crusade, which utilized it completely and in more depth. But talking about a raid that was scrapped, but also completely finished, but then never visited again, the Stormwind Vault. That's right, this ginormous prison. Imagine stockades on steroids. 3 times the size, multiple levels, meant to be full of way more dangerous villains and shenanigans and monsters and all the evil you could imagine. The Stormwind Vault never really got revisited. Now, what is the Stormwind Vault? It's just a bigger version of the Stockades, meant for more dangerous, more elite, more needing much more containment villain. And to a degree, we did kind of see it in BFA in the cinematics with Saofang, but again, that's not really much to go off of because the Vault was never finished. Now, Stockades was a dungeon. Vault was meant to be a raid. And I assume this was meant to be a raid that both the Horde and Alliance could access, similar to Nomerigan, where there's a portal for the Horde to enter Nomerigan. I assume there'd be a portal for the Horde to enter the Vault. Now, what would the bosses have even been? I think this might have tied into Onyxia initially, where you had to find evidence of the people she sent to prison. So you had to go free people, for example, Marshal Windsor in Blackrock Mountain, and things of that nature, where you had to go do all the quest lines and storylines, and you go into the Vault, you free people, and then together with the person you freed and the Marshal, you guys get together, go up to Onyxia, and then it leads to Onyxia. Again, theory crafting. We don't actually know because it was built and then scrapped very early. But they put more effort into it than the player housing, which they also built. They put 2 models of spawnable houses where you could place your own house, move it, change it how you want. It came with pre-built furniture. You put your house down, and they scrapped that. They didn't really put much effort when they realized just how much time was necessary, how many resources. They were like, yeah, nah. And that was a very early on scrap. But Stockades and the Vault was scrapped much later on. Well, the Stockades wasn't scrapped, but Vault. Now though, we have 2 last things to cover. And the first one I want to cover is the Emerald Dream. I'm covering this first because as much as I want to say this had a raid, we don't really know, because it was meant to be a ginormous zone. You were meant to be able to phase into there, go into there, and actually experience it and see all the thing that came from it. But you see, the problem with the Emerald Dream was they just didn't know how to make that shit work and make it look cool. They tried multiple different terrain types, location types, and all of that stuff, and they struggled to make it work. Even in retail, the Emerald Dream was very barely touched on. Like, they can't really make a good Emerald Dream because they don't know how for the most part. And I don't blame them. The art assets they used, they look cool. They tried to make things, but it was understandable that they scrapped it because of the amount of energy and time necessary to make essentially a 3rd continent. Which does bring me on to Hellfire Peninsula, because Outland was meant to be in vanilla, Illidan was meant to be in vanilla as well, and they just decided, nah, this is too much effort. Because the Blood Elves were initially meant to be playable, well, not the Blood Elves themselves, but the Illidari, and then you had the Naga and the Scourge and all these other factions. This was very, very early pre-alpha. A lot of this got scrapped before they even actually started making content for it, but they did actually make the Emerald Dream and Hellfire Peninsula, and both of them are rather completely bare bones, unfinished locations. But the Emerald Dream, if it was finished, would have had a raid, but again, they never even got close to finishing it, so I don't really want to theory craft on what kind of raid we would have got. But if they did have the time, another 2 years to make World of Warcraft, we definitely would have got an Emerald Dream raid and an Outland Hellfire raid, which we did get in TBC anyways. We got hit. We had to go kill Magtheridon. Hey, it is what it is. And then we finally have Mount Hyjal. Now, Mount Hyjal was finished in vanilla. They made the whole zone, from Archimonde's explosion to the World Tree, to there being a raid instance location inside of it. You were meant to travel all the way through Winter Springs, all the way down to the demon-infested area, into Hyjal, up into the zone, and then it expands with this very well designed and thought out and looking location. But that's the problem. They built the whole zone, and they didn't put a single NPC, a single mob, a single quest line. They allude to it. They say Hyjal is here, and then you can't even get there, for the most part without glitching in and things of that nature. And the most disappointing part about Hyjal is they had plans. The raid instance location is essentially where the Barrow should have been, where Illidan was meant to be imprisoned. Now, it could have gone either way. It could have been the Barrow and the corruption of the druids and all the demonic influence and their nightmares, or it could have been Illidan's prison where you go down, you have to fight through all the wardens for some reason or another. It could have been either of those 2 decisions, these directions, but I'm not sure which direction they really wanted to go with. But Hyjal was finished with a raid, and that raid is a placeholder. It's just Onyxia's raid. They just put it there for some reason, so when you get in there, it's just Onyxia's raid. But Hyjal was huge. They had so much content planned. But like I said multiple times in this video, the reason we never got Hyjal, the reason we only got a shortened cut version of Hyjal and TBC as a raid, is because of time. Every single one of Vanilla's secrets, Vanilla's storylines, Vanilla's plot lines was finished for the most part later on. From Gilneas to the Dragon Isles to Uldum to every other location. A lot of these places had their lore and story finished later on, but vanilla was the beginning. And Hyjal is one of those big ones that we really should have gotten, but sadly didn't. I only imagine a universe where the vanilla devs had one more year to finish making World of Warcraft, one more year to make more content, and I imagine what that would have looked like. I imagine that beautiful zone, those beautiful raids, all the extra classes, the races we could have gotten, the tiers, the dungeon. Alas, it was not meant to be. Unless someday we get a Classic Plus, but that's not what this video is about. What is your favorite vanilla secret, your favorite vanilla deleted thing? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you hated it, understandable. Dislike and subscribe so you can hate my next video too. Thank you all for watching. Ebonheart out. Peace.